At this time, I would like to introduce the participants of our National Fellowship panel. So, we will have our representatives from each team to serve as a panelist for our National Fellow panel. Dr. Angelique Jessup from Team Cherry Hill. Grady Hart from Team Richmond. And Minerva Pardo from Team Yakima. At this time, please come and join us on stage. All right, our discussion will lead around three themes. Specifically, we want our fellows to kind of reflect on their experience in the National Fellowship. We want to identify and discuss next steps for them regarding their strategic plans. And we have elevated questions from you, from the audience, to probe a little further from what you've heard this morning, okay? So one of the first things that happened to me when I joined Flamboyant was that I learned to understand my own biases and mindsets. It's something that we ask when we do our family engagement practices at the teacher level before we go into home visits, to understand and challenge our own biases and mindsets and know that everybody comes into the room with biases. That is not something that we're void of. And once we understand those, that helps us best interact with our families without judgment, without preconceived notions, and really be able to move that marker. So, given that information and how critical it is to diversity DEI work, when you entered into the fellowship and we started crafting our strategic plans, was there anything that you kind of feared about your history or leadership that you brought to your work when starting to design your strategic plan? Anyone that wants to jump in there?
Oh my God. Can we have my phone?
Oh, I'm the second one. Sorry.
Thank you.
Is that on? No.
Okay.
I have a teacher voice, so you guys probably.
I have a teacher voice too, but one of the fears that I probably had when we started the fellowship was understanding that equity, it's a challenge by itself, right? Understanding that teachers, administrators, sometimes they don't see. We all have blind spots. And designing a project, designing a plan, having blind spots would have been my biggest fear, because then we would have remained the status quo. So probably that would answer that question. Not being able to see the blind spots and develop a plan full of biases.
I think for me, the fear that I had was more personal, that I came in with baggage, that the last time I was in Cherry Hill was at my sister-in-law's funeral that was a resident of Cherry Hill, and she died tragically from an asthma attack, which is not what we usually hear when we think of someone who's 40 years old that passes away. And we know that the asthma attack was connected to a lot of systemic things that happened that plagued Cherry Hill with access to health care. And I knew about her life and what she'd been through. So I think I struggled initially with how to balance that baggage. And then Cherry Hill is really unique in Baltimore because people don't talk about Cherry Hill. It really, I know we've expressed it in our presentation, but it is really geographically separated and segregated from the rest of the city. So I was concerned about Blackness not being amplified in the conversation. I was concerned that it was, how are we going to really honestly talk about race? And I worried about us kind of watering it down and diluting it.
So trying to think of how to put this delicately. I am so white that I think I might have gotten sunburnt through the windows this morning. It seems like that he would say it that way. So, I mean, honestly, I named that to name kind of the elephant in the room in a lot of rooms that I'm in these days. I've been blessed pretty much throughout my entire career to actually be frequently the minority in most rooms. There are not a whole lot of white males who work in Richmond Public Schools.
Testing.
And that is a really amazing thing. And I look across different sectors, different organizations, and I don't see that in enough places. For my own part, what I do when I come into a space is I start by listening. That's part of the reason I wanted you all to go first for that question. I start by listening, and I see my role more as a listener, as an empathizer, as an organizer. My team will tell you, remember, we did a little activity yesterday, and they call me the glue guy, because I'm the one that's going to try to help set the table. That's typically the role that I try to take, and then I listen to that table before I speak, except for the occasional joke. So I think for me, that very much was something that I came into this project feeling and just knowing that I needed to approach it the right way. There's one meeting in particular that we did where we had a meeting of stakeholders with like 50 plus of our family members, and I got the sense as we were talking with them about some of the things that were kind of struggles for them, and this is in a lower income, primarily African American part of the city, and I got the sense that people were almost kind of holding back a little bit, and so I kind of saw in that moment it was appropriate for me to talk and to say, listen, our system, our structure, the way that we do public education in the United States is racist. It is a structural, systemic problem. And when I said that, people started to actually speak their truth. They felt a little bit more comfortable doing that. So I listen first, and I try to fill in the right gaps where my voice actually speaks a little bit more to power and opens the door for others to do the same.
Thank you all for your vulnerability and your honesty with that. I do recognize that we're not throwing softball questions in front of you today. That's, I think, a really good start to where we're going with the conversations going forward. Looking back at your fellowship experience, what ways did you use family and community strength and voice in the process?
Yeah, fair enough. All right, so I think folks who are familiar with design thinking theory, I know that kind of underpins the flamboyant approach. So you start by empathizing, then you start to think about solutions and ideate together, and then you do some iterations on that until you have something that's viable. We really started by, in our landscape assessment, empathizing with our families. And I think that's where, for me, I learned so much during that process. And it was great not only learning from our families directly, but also from our team conversations about what we were hearing from our families and about the juxtaposition of some of the things that we heard from different parts of our population. I can go into a little bit more depth in this later, but some of the things that I heard from our white families, primarily upper middle class, higher class white families, were incredibly different than their actions. And a few weeks later, when I would actually talk with them in more tangible situations, it wasn't just a hypothetical, but when I talked to them about an actual policy that the school board is considering taking up and changing right now that is going to benefit some of our lower income students, some of the students who really need our support, frankly, equity, that was what this was, I got very different responses than when it was strictly hypothetical.
So honestly speaking, I think when we started gathering a lot of information, we did the empathy interviews, we did all of that, but we did it whenever the schools were still virtual. So we were swimming upstream considerably. It was a lot of fits and starts. Kelly, you're nodding because you're like it. But I think what we leaned on in some of the questioning was knowing that because Cherry Hill is very much tight-knit in itself, to come in with the approach of what the experience was of the families that we were talking to, that they matriculated through Cherry Hill School. So it wasn't just like, oh, tell us about what you want to tell us about with your kid and what your experience has been. And at the same time, we're talking about COVID. You know, Cherry Hill was the community that had the lowest vaccination rate and some of the highest infection rates too. So we were navigating that, but trying to connect with them on a personal level about their generational experience, because a lot of the trauma in Cherry Hill doesn't just situate with the students that are in the building now, but it's a multi-generational reality that we're looking at. So we tried to talk to them more holistically about what their experience was. But I think it's important just to reiterate that it was a challenge. You know, now we're all sitting in this room. I don't think we're not sitting all here in masks. You know, we're enjoying our time. But at that point, everybody was virtual. Everybody was scared. There was a low level of trust, and it was even more concentrated in Cherry Hill because there was already a foundation of a lack of trust. So for us to say, come talk to us, just emotionally and psychologically where everybody was, that took extra time.
I have been in education for over 30 years. And in Mexico, I had the chance to have a school. That was my school. And I loved it. But there was one piece that I didn't do and that I wish I had done better, and that was building connections with families. When I came over here, I said I have to continue working in education. That's all I need. That's all I know how to do. So I started working with families, and I realized that the most important thing was building relationships and listening to people. So when I heard about Flamboyant, I started reading about all the work. I said, that's what I want. I was so fortunate to have my superintendent support this plan, and we wrote a grant. He wrote the grant, and he believed in my crazy ideas. I always tell him, Peter, I have a crazy idea. He says, come in. What is it? What do you have as a crazy idea? I said, let's bring more family engagement to our district. And he had the goal. He said, you know what? It's not just for a school district. It should be for a region. We should be working in collaboration with our districts. And that was a great idea, but we faced a lot of challenges. Because then what we didn't think was that every school district was going to have different needs. And we all, as districts, I have my own challenges to face with some admin people in different buildings, and every school has their own challenges. So that was a big problem. What was interesting was when I was listening to those people in my landscape assessment, in our landscape assessment, I could interview one person, 80-year-old man from the Lower Valley, and his stories were not very much different from a 50-year-old lady living in Yakima, downtown Yakima, or talking to someone from the LGBTQ groups living in West Valley in Sharon. So you start thinking, this is more than just not having the relationships, but not being open to understanding equity, and that we are beautifully diverse. It's not just understanding culture, it's understanding that we all have different needs. So it was a lot of information. And the more people that I talked to, the more people I wanted to interview. It was beautiful. It was beautiful, and it was a lot of learning. So I think that's one piece that I personally continue doing in my school district is listening to people. Now I have the privilege to be working side to side with ASA, the superintendent in the nation. And guess what? I said, guess what? Our biggest challenge is that people don't understand family engagement. Nobody had that class in school. And so all of a sudden we have to be the experts. We're not. So we are working with some superintendents. We are working on developing that family engagement plan and professional development. And of course I said, hey, you know what? We have to bring Flamboyant. And we will do. Right? So it's a lot of, it's kind of like a new way to see things. It's a new lens. But family engagement, remember, family engagement is not an event. Family engagement is a process. And we are successful at implementing some things, and we are not at some others. And that doesn't mean failing. Failing is not doing anything. This is just part of the process.
Excellent. So the next question is the proverbial chicken or egg. Which was most important for the work that you did in your team to get buy-in? First from the community or first from the district?
This is the $1 million question, isn't it? The short answer is, for us, I think we focused on the community first. Frankly, I think we do that in everything that we do. There's only so much that you can do to work directly with the powers that be. And that kind of is what it is. On the plus side, on that end, we did have immediate buy-in at the senior level of our administration. Jason Camrus, our superintendent, who I know is known pretty well in this area, he was immediately on board with this. This was almost like his baby, along with our chief engagement officer, Dr. Harris. And part of the answer to that question is right in the title of our chief engagement officer, right? The fact that we have a chief engagement officer, the fact that one of the 5 top priorities in our strategic plan is to build deep partnerships with families and community, that shows you where we actually put our dollars, put our structure, put our leadership in line with engaging our community. And so for us, that really has been the number one most important part of this, is let's work on getting that community buy-in. We've built our structure around it. We have community hubs in every part of the city where our families know that they can go, not just if their kid is having trouble with an attendance problem, or not just if their kid has not been, doing their homework, but if they don't know for sure where the next meal is coming from. If they don't know for sure that their house is still going to be theirs in a month. Attendance is important, right? Grades are important. School is important. But if you're trying to answer those kinds of questions for your family, we got to meet you where you are before you can meet us at making sure your kid arrives to school on time.
And I don't know how this is going to sound, but this is what I saw. When we had that interview, the beginning, the process, and interviewing people in the community that could be really supportive, I had lots of people from any area you can imagine. Yeah, we're there, we support you. What I think is that a lot of the times they say yes to tick the box. Yeah, we're part of. When we say, now let's do this, wait a minute. I don't know how that's going to look. So that has been a little bit of a challenge. And challenges are not obstacles, just things that we have to strategically work to overcome. So I have a friend that he always told me, you never have problems, you have situations. Because if you see things as a problem, that means you're not doing anything. So yeah, we have situations, and I think that a lot of the people want to be part of the picture, but don't want to do the work. And so maybe that has been one of the challenges. Being in the arena, you have to learn how to be vulnerable, like Brené Brown says, right? You want to be in the arena, let's be vulnerable, let's learn. And we're going to fail, but let's continue. And sometimes we are teary. Is that what it says? Yeah.
Yep.
But then the next day, let's continue.
So
And let's move on.
I'm going to add my 2 cents to that. As a principal, I always had an empty chair at the table when I had meetings. The empty chair was that student's voice that was not at the table. And I tried to tell adults, families, parents that this meeting is in the best interest of that student that doesn't have a voice here. And once you can get that over with both administrators, teachers, parents, to let them get out of their own way, that's when true movement can occur for student achievement. I don't think it's a negative thing of getting the community first or the district first. We just need to understand what are the needs, and let's get that solved for. So thank you, everyone. Our next question, fun one. What did you value most from your experience as a National Fellow?
So I think I started when the fellowship first began, and then we had a little bit of turnover in our group with just some staff changes. I would say that the best experience has hands down been the colleagues that I've worked with. And I'm just going to take a couple seconds to thank you guys. You all bring each of your different unique perspectives and expertise and skills. And I think that we worked really well and fit really well as a team. The other piece that I really enjoyed with this fellowship was, I'm just kind of a natural interdisciplinary thinker, so I love hearing about what's happening and what the lives are like in the other cities. So, it's really been great to get out of my Baltimore DMV bubble and to learn particularly about Yakima and in Richmond, to see the similarities and the challenges that we face, but also the nuanced depth in what the differences are, and allowing me to think differently about the problems that we face in Baltimore. I think it's been good to challenge the way I've thought about it. Just in our little debrief lunch conversation, we went to a conversation about childcare, which I think, honestly was spurred by the presentations that y'all did. So we're learning with you and learning a lot from you. So thank you to colleagues in Yakima and Richmond also. Who wants to go next?
Before you steal these from me, same thing. Learning from others was the most beautiful thing, and learning what other people are thinking. Oh yeah, I never thought about that. That's a brilliant thing. I thought that was the best part.
Same. I will elaborate, though. Y'all, I talked a little bit about already in my early response. I mean, being a white male showing up in these spaces, I really have to be intentional about that. I appreciate that you all gave me that opportunity to do that, to bring my real self, my skills, the things that I still need to grow at, to let me make mistakes. I know we got to do that all together. I mean, and Kenga, you're like my work mom, my work aunt. You always check in with me. I walk into a room and then Kenga goes, "Hi, sweetie, how are you?" I say, "I'm good now that I got your smile in my life." Chastity, hablas dos idiomas. Yeah, you know how to connect with every one of our families. There's not a single family we serve that you can't connect with, that you can't relate to. And when you speak, people listen. En cualquier idioma. Ladisha, I see you trying to hide. Ladisha, you are wonderful. You have stuck with us throughout this whole thing, the ups and downs. And you come from a background of mental health. So you know how to use that for our students, but you also walk into a room where we're all at and you know who could maybe use a little extra support. And I see you go up to them and give them that support. Dr. Brown. Ah! For those who don't know, Dr. Brown and I worked together at VCU for many years before I kind of stole her away to come be my boss again at RPS. Dr. Brown, I said it 2 nights ago to you, and I'm going to say it verbatim again. I do not know how you do all of the things that you do at a high level. A doctorate, a mother of 2, a devoted wife, and I have lost track of the number of times that you have said something, done something, shown something without even realizing how many people were watching and how much we learned just from watching you. I am so lucky to have you in my life as a mentor. I am so lucky to have all of you in my lives. And it's nice to have a little bit of a bigger family now.
I just knew somebody was going to say coaching from Sanjay. So our next series of questions are going to go look forward for tomorrow. Let's say that all funding has been procured after today, all lights have turned green, as you look into launching tomorrow, day one, what would you be most excited for?
I'll go. I think it's figuring out where the rubber hits the road, moving from talk to action. We spent a lot of time thinking about philosophically and theoretically what we wanted to say, and already, lots of momentum with the initiatives at the district level and at the school level, but I think it's just going deeper into what that implementation actually looks like. Because there's a lot of details in the implementation. And then last, making sure that we maintain the same fervor with what we have that we have now. I think sometimes whenever you are implementing something big, it's very seductive to kind of like shave off certain pieces. And just we're going to have to be really disciplined to take it step by step and not to try to, take it all, like implement everything at the same time. So I'm looking forward to, and a little scared about what it's gonna look like whenever you break it into minute pieces.
It will be not just the beginning, but it's, as I said before, it's not an event, right? So it's not what we did right now. It's what we learned and how we want to use what we learned moving forward. So probably, and you can see that Yakima team has a big challenge, and that is that we are actually a lot of districts together. So that is a huge challenge. But I think that there is key elements in this team that can make beautiful things and make a difference by making small but significant changes in the everyday work for the districts that we work for. I work for West Valley School District, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to focus all of my attention and make sure that in Spanish we have one saying that says, "Del que mucho abarca, poco aprieta." And that means that if you want to cover too much, you don't really get the results that you want. And I think that was our challenge from day one. I remember Tamika having those questions. Okay, I still don't get it. What about these? And she wanted us to kind of start focusing on just one group or make something more achievable, more realistic. We had those challenges and those conversations, but we all had, no, I want to make sure that my school district receives the support. So I think that day one started 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. And this is a process, and this is the information that we received. And now how we're moving forward with the position that we have. And it's also something that we learned, right? Change is the only thing that happens in life all the time. So I might not be even serving migrant families in a month. There's some changes in my school district, and I might not be serving migrant families anymore. So does that mean that the work that I'm doing stops? No. So I have to, all the work and all the information that I know now, how can I implement it in my school districts with the families that I serve and work with the admin people that I can have influence on? Even though if I have the greatest heart, the Lower Valley school districts, they don't need to listen to Minerva. Why are they going to listen to Minerva? But if I go to my own team, my own admin people, and I say, this is what I learned, this is what we need, well, at least we're in the same team. And I will have to face the challenges of getting their buy-in. But that's what I think. So we had a very unique situation. It was a good learning experience. It was a good getting to know each other as a team. But I think that day one started 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Can I get a vacation? Can we start there? No, I think to give a real tangible answer to this, I am very, very excited about hopefully getting funding so that we can start paying our families. For too long, we've been taking their experience, their expertise for granted. I think Dr. Brown put it perfectly earlier when talking about, we pay these consultants all kinds of money when they come in. Why are we not paying our families? Their time is valuable too. Their expertise, their learned experience is valuable too. So that is definitely the thing that I'm really looking forward to. Aside from that, Angelique, Minerva, I think you guys hit the nail on the head, how to kind of take it piece by piece and not feel overwhelmed by the whole process, and how to just make sure that we continue to center our families.
Thank you, Grady. Actually, I'm going to insert one of the questions from the audience, specifically around that reimbursements for families. The question is specifically, how will you operationalize paying caregivers to sit on committees? What criteria and structures will you use to determine who gets paid and how much? Is that anything that you guys have looked at going forward for RPS?
Nicely done, Sanjay. That was an excellent job of inserting that question. So that's something that we started talking about again yesterday. You know, it's something we've thought about, but started to kind of talk about a little bit more in depth. Some of the ideas that have come up for just kind of the baseline, like how do you kind of differentiate, right? Like, frankly, people like me should not be getting stipends from RPS for coming and, you know, participating in ways that they would anyway. So, I mean, there's things like being able to use free and reduced lunch to be able to kind of differentiate a little bit, but there's privacy that comes with that. We're still thinking through that piece of things. But I think like the most substantive part of that answer that we have thought about is just ways to use our existing networks to start kind of recruiting the families who we know should be at the table, but for various reasons cannot be. And we've got the infrastructure to do that. We have our community hubs all over the city. We have amazing community partners who work directly with us. We have faith-based communities who work directly with us. We know the folks who would like to be involved and can do it and have all of the experience and knowledge in the world to do it, but just can't because they need to be at work. They need to be at that first or second job, and the timing is not easy. The transportation is not easy. Those are the folks within our existing networks who we've already been building relationships with, who we're excited to be able to say, hey, all of this expertise you've been sharing with us, now we want to start to pay you for it, and we're sorry that we couldn't do that sooner.
Thank you, Grady. The next two questions are also from our audience, and this is for Cherry Hill and Yakima. It's related somewhat to something we talked about earlier. What are your next steps for sharing your learnings and your plans with the communities that you engaged with earlier in the process? I'll say it one more time. What would be your next steps for sharing the learning that you've done in this fellowship back with the communities that you initially engaged with early in the process during your landscape assessments and those items?
So I think Cherry Hill is in a unique position because the configuration of the work squarely puts community with Cherry Hill Strong, with Dream Big that comes in from like the foundation and funder world and city schools. So we have this really interesting like concentric circle of partners that are already connected and meeting regularly, working regularly, strategizing regularly. So we talked a little about it during our lunch debrief, trying to figure out what is it that we're doing, what is it that we were doing yesterday and days before that really needs to be tightened up and expanded on. So even though we have really good partnerships and a good configuration already, this convening has kind of lifted up the need for making sure that we see if we need to tweak or reframe how the collaboration works to make sure that the work sustains and continues.
Mm-hmm. And I think that for us, it's community of practice. We all will have different goals, different pieces that we need to implement in our school districts or our jobs as ESD. But community of practice and sharing the good practices that we all have. What are you doing in Yakima? What are we doing in West Valley? How can we support each other? Hey, you know what? This is the way I did it. How about you bring these to the conversation? But I can also say that when I'm in a meeting, I always take the advantage to say, well, in Flamboyant, and this is what we learned from Flamboyant. So now every now and then when I say with Flamboyant, well, they know where we're coming from. And if any of us in the team, we're in a meeting and we say, well, Flamboyant, we're going to say, okay, something is happening right there. So hopefully we can provide some support to other districts, but we have to focus on what we can change.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Since we're talking about audience questions, I'm going to ask the last one. How will you ensure educators have the mindsets that they need to partner with families around the children's education? understanding that a lot of us work at the district level, how does that kind of parse down to the school and building level? Have any of your teams started to kind of game plan what that looks like?
Well, Yakima team, we continue building the possibility of having the professional development family engagement 101. That is something that ESD will probably be leading and making sure that our region receives that support. And then, but we also have to make sure that our teachers, and that needs to start with the principal. Principals need to really believe that family engagement is not just conferences or sending the newsletters. And sometimes they believe that is family engagement. So making some little examples and working with some teachers that believe in it, and I think it sounds a lot like the work we do with equity. Some people believe in it, some people don't, but if we have two people at the table that believe in the work and believe that it's okay to look for that social justice so that all students and families receive what they need, well, it's the same with the family engagement. Family engagement is actually an equity practice. And if we can make sure that all of our families receive what we need, I think that would be awesome. But we have to start with the principals and sit at a table and have their buy-in. And that will be my goal.
I'm going to steal something you said, because I was thinking about it also, that when I've talked to people about like what this fellowship is, I'm like, well, I really think that family engagement is racial equity work. And they look at me kind of puzzled, and I'm like, well, if we're talking about how we're going to respect black families, like whenever I insert race, how we're going to build relationships with black families, how we're going to build, two-way trust and communication with black families and predominantly white teachers, I'm talking about family engagement. And I'm talking about the bias or the comfort level or lack thereof they have with actually embracing the black families and the kids that and their children that they're educating. So it made me think about what you said, Minerva. But this is an interesting question, Sanjay, because I'm not a district employee and work completely independently. So I'm going to just channel my own thoughts here. I think that Baltimore is at a really kind of ripe stage to really deepen the work that's already happening with the Office of Equity at the district with family engagement. And I know that steps are, I know that this work is already happening. I'm looking at you guys in that office. But I wonder how much more can happen, how much more intentionality can happen with the collaboration of the offices. There's lots of trainings, there's lots of PDs, but our teachers being trained to also think about how to actualize what they're learning in their racial equity training along. Like, you can practice this right now with how you talk to your families and the type of relationships you build with your families. And it has to be something that's sustained, because I think we can all kind of agree that there's been a receding with the conversation around race and race equity, that 2.5, 3 years ago, everybody was out in the streets, everybody was saying something, but now, not so much. So I think it's important to go beyond the PDs and the trainings and to really think about how are all of the different offices, academic offices, racial equity offices, engagement offices, what is the not just the shared language, but what is the shared action and practice behind it?
Yeah. So, stemming right off of that, I'm going to give a shout out to our Chief Engagement Officer, Dr. Harris, who, anytime that someone will listen, tells them that family engagement is an academic strategy. Right? Family engagement impacts academics. It impacts grades. It impacts attendance. It impacts a lot of things. And so, for us, a big part of what we've done is started to put the tools necessary for teachers and other folks in our schools to be connected to this broader work. So, Dr. Brown in our presentation earlier talked a little bit about our attendance dashboard that we have across the district now. And it allows everybody, from school social workers to our community hubs to teachers to principals, everyone who is engaged with a student can know what that child's attendance is looking like. And as a teacher, if you see that a student has missed 3 classes in a row or 3 days in a row, you can touch base with the social worker. You can touch base with the school psychologist. You can touch base with our community hub. And you can try to help kind of get to the bottom of it and at least just make sure that that student and family have the support that they need. In RPS, and I know in a lot of our schools, if a student misses 3 days in a row, that might be something a lot more serious than them just sleeping in, right? The only other thing that I would add to that, and it's a bit of an elephant in the room, but I know we all know it and acknowledge it, we ask our teachers to do too much for the amount of pay that we're giving them, for the support that they have. And I think, frankly, for a lot of us, that's the case for us too, right? I don't want to like name that without also naming that for us, but it's important to acknowledge that we ask our teachers to do a lot with a little. And I think in the same way that we're excited about being able to pay our families and, make sure that we're really giving our families and community members what they deserve, we've been working really hard to do the same thing for our teachers. I'm going to give another shout out to our superintendent, Jason Camrus. If the budget that he has proposed this year is passed, in the 5 years since he came to us, we will have raised teacher pay on average by 30% cumulatively in 5 years. That puts us in a much better place than we were before. It's not enough, but it puts us in a much better place than we were before. We need more help from the state, and we need more help from the federal government.
Okay, last 2 questions. What advice would you give to the next cohort? What advice would you give to the next cohort, cohort number 4?
I would tell them to lean into being bold and controversial and to ask for forgiveness later. Yeah. That's it.
I like that. Anyone else?
Go ahead and go first. That's a tough question. Probably my advice would be build a team that it's going to be supportive, that it's going to be actively engaged all the time, and that you will have a common vision. So be very strategic about the people you bring to your team.
That leads perfectly into mine, is just to say your team is going to become the most important people in your life outside of your household, and maybe at times even more than that. So lean into your team, know that they're there to support you, and be there to support them, because it's a long journey together, but you can get through it and you can do amazing things if you do it together. The only other one that I would say, and I think it's the most important one, is make sure that you fast for 3 days prior to coming to any event where Sanjay is in charge of the food. And make sure you give Sanjay plenty of love.
That was unsolicited. All right, our last question. So bring it home, folks. What was the biggest learning from your fellowship experience? What was the biggest learning from your fellowship experience?
I would say that I have to admit that we cannot do it alone. In West Valley, we have an initiative. It's called Stronger Together, Más Fuertes Juntos. And the purpose of this initiative is to collaborate with their partners in the community and address the systemic barriers that impact the success for all of our students in the district. We have been able to identify challenges such as low engagement on voting system. So we have conversations, we talk about that, and we have families not voting. Therefore, we always have the same group of people making decisions for their own groups. So we have to have more engagement. We also identified having low need of education. So now we're bringing, I don't know if you're familiar with plazas comunitarias. We have a plaza comunitaria in West Valley, and now we are educating parents and bringing the elementary or secundaria for the parents. So what I have learned is that we cannot do it alone. We have to talk. We have to see. There's one activity I like to do. We have a box, and we have different pictures on each side of the box. We like to do that at the end of our training, and we raise the box, and we ask the people on this side, what do you see? Oh, I see a house. People on this side, what do you see? Oh, I see a star. What do you see? I see a rainbow. Okay, everybody's going to see what they can see from the side they're standing. So it's important that we hear everybody and that we learn from everybody, because everybody is part of the community. We are wired for connection, another quote from Brené Brown, right? So we are wired for connection. We cannot do this alone. We need to support each other.
Excellent.
I'd say my biggest learning is that the answers and solutions are in the community already, and not with the elites that have the power and the voice and the influence, and that those who are in the community, if they're working in a school or been doing thankless work in the community for decades, they've been screaming and saying, we need this, we deserve this, but they haven't had the influence, the access, or the power. And that if as a team you can harness their muted voice and turn that into kind of facilitating that power for them, that is something that you can utilize, and it's a tool that can be very powerful in itself with moving the work.
I don't have a whole lot to add to that, honestly. I think what I heard from both of you is that systemic change is hard. Mm-hmm. Systemic change is hard. I work a lot with community partners, and frankly, even sometimes when I'm just in the community talking with someone in Richmond and they don't know that I work for RPS, they might get on the topic and they might say, man, it's just the school system. Like, I might have to move out to the county because, the school system, they just can't figure it out. They just can't figure it out. They can't do it. Say, do you know what predated the last, let's even narrow it down to the last century? Do you know how long it took us to get where we are now? Do you really expect that to be fixed overnight? Do you expect our current superintendent, who came into a position where there just weren't any systems left because of all of the turnover, all of the decades of underinvestment that we have? Do you know that 80+% of our school funding comes from local property taxes? Do you know that the highway systems were built in the 1950s for two purposes? One, to destroy primarily African American communities across every city in this country, and two, to enable white people and people with more means to leave the city so that those local property taxes could be used for their schools while doing nothing for the kids who were left in the cities. It doesn't get fixed overnight. One of the best things that our superintendent ever said, it was the first time that I ever heard him speak, and it's when I knew that I wanted to work for Jason Cameras. He said, RPS's trajectory is not going to look like this, right? It's not going to be a straight diagonal up. It's going to look like this, right? Hopefully without falling at the end. It takes time, but if we really want change, if we don't want just the superficial kind of change that comes from things like just putting a bridge over a highway that once was a road, that's nice, but that doesn't give us real change. If we really want real systemic change, it takes time, concentrated effort, and people like us and people in our communities. Yeah.
Thank you. Friends in the audience and on the live stream, let's acknowledge our panelists one more time: Minerva, Angelique, and Grady. Excellent job.